Well, thank you for that introduction. Thank you for having me. Today, I get a great opportunity to talk about the future of allyship. And first off, I have to say that I am just fortunate, and I know Scott Anderson feels the same way, of being lucky to be a man on this stage and witness all these amazing women tell amazing stories. I have a story to tell today, too. For those that don't know me, my name is Ashley Bell. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. And I came here to Salt Lake City with my co-founder, the youngest daughter of Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Bernice A. King, to found the first black-owned bank in the Rockies. And with her as my co-founder, I guess you can also say the first woman-founded bank in the Rockies as well, in Utah. So the future of allyship for me has to start with me understanding the past. About what I've seen is what allyship can be. And for most of us, the first people that we see in our lives doing the allyship work are the people closest to us. And I have to start with my mother. My mother was the very first teacher in my town, which is north of Atlanta, to integrate our schools. And for those that don't know, integration in the Deep South was pretty much the baseline of all the economic as well as social challenges of a region. You can imagine a young African-American woman that was a teacher who was so talented. She was an opera singer. She could play multiple instruments. And then she got the call to be the first black teacher to go to an all-white school. And I watched my mother tell this story because it was before I was born, but I heard it from one of her best friends at her funeral. And one of her white colleagues stood up there and she said, you know, Miss Bell did something for me that I didn't know I needed when it came to allyship. And she used this word. She said, I didn't know how to approach black kids because I had never taught them. I didn't know how to deal with black parents because I never had to be with them. And at the same time, she said, I watched your mother take a lot of kids from my community who wanted to be in her class so they could understand how to take leadership from somebody that didn't look like them. And she told me the story of how my mother held space for so many children that were outside of her community in a way that changed their lives forever. And she said, as a woman, her leadership set a bar that was so high. And she told the story of this one little girl who went home every day to a domestic violence family. Her mother was abused by a father that was an alcoholic. And she said, I watched your mother see this little girl come in there every day, dead tired, couldn't stay up in class. And it was easy for you to sit there and say to her, she's just do her work, be better. But my mother never questioned why she was tired. She just found space for her. And when I say find space, we say this all the time. I mean literally found space. This little girl at recess would sleep under my mother's desk because that was the only time she felt safe. And as she felt safe under there, my mom didn't tell anyone she was there. She gave her a chance to do this. And this woman came and told this story at the funeral. She says, it was in that moment that I realized that everything she had going on at home, your mother gave her a chance to find safety and then became an opportunity for her to talk, to tell her story. And that young girl became one of my best friends later in life. And I never heard this story until she told me later. But it began a journey for me to understand something, what allyship can mean. It is seeing each other beyond our differences, but also through our struggles, and being able to be open to receive each other, even in our lowest moments, but even our highest moments, but understanding that we are more sometimes than what you see to the eye. And my father had this same level of understanding in the sense that he did everything he was supposed to do, was a black man that came home from Vietnam, fought the war, and tried to grow a corporate career. And he did that, but lost his job at the exact same age that I am right now looking at you, because his job went overseas. He couldn't find a job and had to take a job making 15% of what he's making, right, that he was making before he lost his job. Now, I'll tell you right now, I don't know how much money you got, but if you walked out of here with only 15% of it, it's a different life. But my dad had to delete things off of his resume just to get interviews. But this is the point of this. He said, Ashley, at 42 years old, I decided to just say, you know what, I'm going to give it up to God and go and work in my purpose. Because my purpose will allow that 15% not to feel like 15%. So my dad gave up corporate job working at a management at a Fortune 500 and became a jailer at a youth detention center. And that changed his life and mine. My dad was at a juvenile detention center and he was able to start off as a JCS, which is a lower level person that just checks kids in and checks them out. And within 5 years, he became warden. But when I watched what that did to my dad, a man that came home stressed every day, all of a sudden became the happiest person I ever, version of himself. But more than that, growing up in an underserved community, I shared my dad with women, with young girls and young men. They shared my father. We had the same dad because he got to know them. And he understood what they were going through, much like my mother did for that young girl under that desk. And what ended up happening is I decided to become a lawyer. And when I decided to become a lawyer, I decided I didn't want to go and be a big lawyer at a big firm, even though I did that later in life. I became a partner at the largest law firm in the world. But for the young people out here, I wanted to start in my purpose. And so I started out representing young women and men in juvenile jails with my dad. And here's the lesson I learned about allyship in that context. There was a young girl named Maria. She was suspended from school all the time, to the point to where she would get into fights because they said that she couldn't stand in a classroom context and she was disruptive. So she ended up in juvenile detention center, sentenced over and over again. So I go in to work with my dad because that was our thing. I would drive to work with my dad. He'd go into the detention center. I'd go meet my clients. And he said, Ashley, Maria's not what they say she is. They're going to give you a file today on this girl. And they're going to tell you that she's disruptive, that she's disrespectful, that she may be in a gang, and all these things. And they just keep passing her through the system. He said, but I've tried my best to send teachers in here to teach her. And I believe the problem is none of that. I think she may just be dyslexic and have a learning disability. And I don't think anybody ever picked it up. And I think that what she's doing is acting out because she's having a hard time reading. And she's having a hard time understanding. And this is her response to that. My dad gave me a file that was the same file that the state gave me on her. But she was more than that file. The story they told was not her story. It was the outcomes of another story that was not told. And it was in that moment that I learned to be a good lawyer. I could not take what was given to me in the files that were presented to me, that people were more than that. My dad knew the story of every young lady and man in that detention center. I was able to help her and many others differently because I didn't see them as the file. I didn't see them as the paperwork that was in front of me. And unfortunately, we lost her. We lost her. And my dad and I went to give our final respects, and when we did, my dad told me, there's too many kids out here like this. The system has failed too many of them. So as I began my journey to go from that to finance, I saw the exact same thing happening in the financial sector. People creating credit files on people that thinks it tells your story, a credit score, 3 digits that surmises your entire life. And it really doesn't. And if we want to talk about what allyship really is, you look and see how that has played out for us, we shouldn't accept it. When you have a credit scoring system that tells women and minorities 60% of the time more than white males that they can't qualify for a home when they have the exact same income, but a lower score, you shouldn't accept that. We should challenge it. When you look at what happened in Marion, California, the 60 Minutes covered just 4 months ago of a woman who happened to be trying to refinance her house, and she was married, and her husband was not home when the appraiser came to her house. And the appraiser was a man. He comes in her house. He surveys the house because she's trying to get a refinance meeting. She's trying to get an appraisal. And she said her house should be worth $600,000 to $700,000. It came back worth at $425,000. And she tells her husband, I don't know what happened because the neighbors have a $700,000 house. Our yard looks better. We got all these other things I've done around the house that look great. What is happening? And she was a woman of color. And she was married to a white gentleman. And you can read this story. He said, honey, you go take a day off. I'll be here. We'll try this again. But I think something's wrong. This is him being an ally in this relationship. They took the pictures of their children off the wall. They took all the cooking in the house that had that smell that may be ethnic cooking they thought may be offensive. They reappraised their house and it came back at $800,000. This is the gap, the equity, the wealth that is being lost. So if we know that the systems are broken, what can we do as allies to fix them? We'll put allyship in the mirror and spell it backwards. We'll go at Y. It's to yield, to take time to realize that the system is broken, to listen to the people affected most by the system and understand their story, to learn, to educate yourself, to read a book, to read an article, to take your time to understand the underpinnings and the history of the system and how we got to where we are. And then it's A, to act, to do something about it. If we know that the financial system is not what we believe in, if we know that, whether it comes to our democracy and someone's asking for your vote, don't be distracted by the sideshows. If somebody is asking for your vote and they didn't talk to you about the financial structures of this country and give you a pathway or a way to understand how we make it better, then they're ignoring all the beautiful things that we're talking about at this conference. Add that to the action. When we try to think through what allyship can look like, I'm proud to say that when Dr. King and I thought about where in the world will we put this bank, this valley, this place has been an unexpected surprise. I'm honored that I'm able to be in a room to where some of you have beat the odds. Some women in this room have beat the odds and become wildly successful. Others are on their way. And they tell us that those that have made it should open up the doors for others. But I'm here to tell you what Jackie is doing and what many of these women are doing are not just opening the doors, but we must take the hinges off these doors. The doors of opportunity are right in front of us. Don't crack them. Do everything you can to make sure that those young women that are in this crowd right now, when there's a SheMoney conference in 15 years, they come back and say this was the place where allyship manifested itself into a movement. Where this place, Salt Lake City, was not just the first place where you could have a black-owned bank, but a place where women make more money than anywhere else in the country because they banded together. There's been so many speeches about what we haven't done. I promise you that one of our greatest leaders, Martin Luther King Jr., gave a speech, his final speech, where he talked about the mountaintop. And it was prophetic because it was his last. And he said he would get to the mountaintop, and when he got there, he looked on the other side, and he said, I might not get there with you. And he didn't. But he did say, we will get there. This is our opportunity to live up to what was called to be the beloved community. That beloved community begins with the understanding that all of us, if we lead with love, if we lead with light, that we can light up this world and find a pathway out of every dark corner that we have and a future that we deserve and a country and a place that all of us equally can call home. With grace and mercy, we all can find redemption. This country needs it. Our state, our cities need it. The soul of America will be determined by what happens in rooms like this, by women like you. Thank you.